Oh God, oh Jesus Christ. Christ. I'm not doing the Scottish accent. Welcome to By Candlelight, beaming goth, darkwave and post-punk straight into your brain, aided by a maypole, some antlers and more than one sacrifice. You may remember that I said I feel a folk horror by candlelight episode waiting in a bush with a scythe. Watch this space. Yes, my friends, this episode is all about folk horror. Whilst I love the standard atmospheric supernatural film, folk horror is a genre I've gotten into relatively recently, so I've rounded up 10 of my faves. It's important to say that these aren't necessarily the best folk horror films. That would be foolish of me. These are only my favourites, so please feel free and let me know yours. So, what is folk horror? This is an important question because quite a lot of resources label films as folk horror just because they've got a witch or a ritual in them. But defining it is tricky because there doesn't seem to be one agreed on definition. Some have said that it refers to specifically British films of the 60s and 70s that have a rural setting and feature elements of paganism and folklore. Whilst that may be the origin, we know that we've had relatively new folk horror films that are also from other countries. What does appear to be a common theme though is that they all seem to feature a final summoning or ritual. How I have approached this list is to look at films that have a significant element of paganism, folklore and superstition that drive the plot, and that's the important bit. So a film that simply features a witch or a ritual as an incidental plot choice wouldn't necessarily be folk horror. The folklore or belief systems or just the dark side of nature has to be at the core of it to be featured on this list. So let's get started, shall we? And just to say, there will be no spoilers in these here parts. At 10, it's The Blood on Satan's Claw. Despite being a recognised classic, it's only very low down on my list because I discovered it relatively late. It centres around an English village whose young inhabitants fall under the influence of a demonic being. It's a good start. The root of all this, in classic folk horror style, is the discovery of a mysterious skull in a field. In fact, this all plays out in an English rural setting, and you can practically smell the grass and the moss. It's the very fact that a demonic presence invades this rural setting that makes this folk horror. Its rushed ending may take some points away, but this still has some disturbing moments that make this a cult classic. At 9, it's Witchfinder General. Like The Blood on Satan's Claw, this is a film that I came to really late, hence it being at number 9 for me. Made in 1968, it follows Matthew Hopkins, played by Vincent Price, as he travels through rural England hunting for witches during the English Civil War. However, the plot turns to revenge, and it's Matthew that finds himself hunted. It's a stark demonstration of the power of belief, made all the more horrific as it's loosely based on a real-life Witchfinder General. Without giving too much away, it's the juxtaposition between the seemingly peaceful rural landscapes and the violence being whipped up there that makes this truly folk horror. At 8, it's A Field in England. Ben Wheatley's fourth film, released in 2013, actually made him synonymous with folk horror for a while. Like Witchfinder General, it is set during the English Civil War, but this combines visceral aspects with psychedelic drugs and lots of strobe effects. It's hard to sum this film up because it mainly plays as just this wild trip. Essentially, it starts with a bunch of 4 deserters looking for an alehouse in, surprise, surprise, rural England. After ingesting some mushrooms, and we're not talking shiitake here, they fall under the spell of a mysterious field. It's compelling and totally bonkers, and I think the fact that you have to be in the right mood for it is the reason why I've placed it at my number 8. At 7, it's She Will. This 2021 film centres around a former film star who travels to Scotland to heal after an operation. However, the resort she is convalescing in was also the scene of witch burnings many centuries earlier, and this has a profound effect on our protagonist. With the past connecting with the present via powerful energies, and in such a remote rural setting, its folk horror aspects are pushed to the fore. The fact that it also contains Me Too themed plot choices adds an additional layer and brings this bang up to date. At 6, I've got Kill List. I guarantee that if you've not seen this film before, you will be initially confused as to the reason why I've included it on this list. In fact, I can't say anything more about the folk horror aspect because this would spoil the film. What I can say is that Ben Wheatley's second film does not look or feel like traditional folk horror. It follows 2 hitmen who are hired by a mysterious client. You think you're watching a crime thriller, but there are early hints that things could possibly take a dark turn into the woods. It's a vicious film, and I guarantee that it will stay with you long after it has ended. At 5, it's The Witch. So this slow burn from Robert Eggers centres around a 17th century puritanical family. Banished from a Puritan settlement, the family make a new home near a secluded forest. Sounds good already, doesn't it? It's in the bag. When their very young son vanishes, the family is thrown into a spiral of blame, fear and paranoia. The more religious the family become in the face of this horrific occurrence, the more they seem to be surrounded by malevolence. The isolation and rural seclusion plays right into the hands of folk horror. It's incredible to think that this is the debut feature film from Robert Eggers. It builds atmosphere from the outset, and if it feels a little slow, stay with it. You won't want to see a forest for a while. At 4, it's The Ritual. When 4 friends go hiking in a Swedish forest, you know that this is not going to end in a fluffy party. And so it is that the presence in the forest that appears to be hunting them has, unsurprisingly, a folkloric root. As the unknown threat ramps up, tensions arise within the group. There are these amazing shots of this Scandinavian forest that is beautiful by day and yet evil by night. In fact, it shows how beautiful nature can be until you're lost. It can then feel like it's turning against you, trapping you to aid its malevolent inhabitant. If The Witch didn't put you off forests, this will. I can kiss that lumberjack application form goodbye then. At 3, it's the Blair Witch Project. I'll be really honest, I struggled with including this. I mean, all the elements of folk horror appear to be in place. There's the initial interviews with the residents of Burkittsville, where they talk about the folklore connected with the Blair Witch. Then there's the actual presence in the woods and that iconic scene with Heather in the tent filming herself. It feels more rooted in found footage than folk horror, doesn't it? However, it definitely has elements such as the fears of the local residents coming true for the gang of filmmakers. Anyway, let me know what you think. Would you say that this was folk horror? At 2, it's Midsommar. This 2019 film starts with a group of friends being invited to a Swedish commune. The smiling, gentle welcome they receive does not prepare them for the ghastly religious practices they witness. The idea of outsiders entering the realms of a cult is classic folk horror. The more everyday these rituals become, the more ghastly they are to watch. A mesmerising and jaw-dropping film. My number 1 is, come on, you've already guessed it, it's The Wicker Man. And I hated this film when I first saw it. It was on some list of the greatest ever horror films or something. I was used to watching horror films and feeling scared, and this didn't scare me at all. And it had songs in it. Songs? What? It's a musical. Oh, it took many views and a recognition that bands were covering Willow's song, such as Faith in the Muse. Slowly, it began to seep into my being like honey dripping on a lampshade. I don't know what that means. Made in 1973, for me it's a million miles away from its companions Witchfinder General and Blood on Satan's Claw. Highly influential, particularly on films such as Midsommar, this stands as the quintessential folk horror film. If you don't know the premise, it begins with Sergeant Howie being called to a remote Scottish island to investigate the disappearance of a young girl. Throughout his investigation, his patience and his strong religious beliefs are tested as the mystery ramps up. Interspersed with songs that nearly make this a musical, you think you're watching a quirky little film until things begin to turn nasty. Not only my favourite folk horror film, but just one of my favourite films of all time. So that's my top 10. Feel free to let me know yours. You stay safe out there. Don't take the shortcut through the forest, and don't trust the landlord's daughter. And whatever you do, don't look behind you. I'm joking. I'm not.